On September 6th, 1987, I was welcomed into the Catholic Church as a member. My godparents flew all the way down to Mexico City to purchase a special baptismal gown for me. It was white and beautiful, as my soul was said to be, as the waters of baptism washed away the sin I had no part in being branded on me. Growing up indoctrinated, you don't realize that you have been indoctrinated. You don't realize this until you step out into the outside reality and see things from an entirely new perspective. The outside world is labeled secular, worldly, godless, and it's just you alone against a tidal wave of evil, and only God can save you. My mother constantly preached to us kids, all 7 of us, that hell was a very real place and that we were constantly in danger of going there. Religion was a huge part of our lives. In fact, there wasn't a single aspect of it that was not touched by it. We prayed first thing in the morning together as a family. We prayed when we got in the car, calling on divine protection from God and from the saints, even if it was a short trip, even just down to the grocery store. We prayed. We signed the cross at markers on the side of the road denoting a fatal accident. My mother would look at us and scold us if we failed to do this, reminding us that the souls in purgatory, once they got to heaven, would only remember us if we remembered them. It was I'll scratch your back and you'll remember me and put in a good word to God when it's my turn to go to purgatory. After all, none of us were going to heaven right away. None of us were saints. We prayed at noon. The Methodist church down the road would ring the bells, and we would smirk and tell ourselves that those poor Protestants didn't understand that they were really following an ancient Catholic tradition. But if they forgot to ring the bells, my mother would shake her head and proclaim, "Those dumb Protestants can't even get that right." And we would nod our heads in agreement at our own superiority. None of my parents' family were Catholic. Both of my parents were converts. My dad only converted after he lost a bet to my mom. Nowadays, he brushes it aside and says it was too obvious not to convert. But I remember when I was a child, my mother proudly telling us how she had won that bet, and how God was on her side. God was always on her side. And if he wasn't, he sure marched to the beat of her drum. My parents loved me and my siblings. My father loved us so much we rarely saw him, as he worked very hard to keep food on the table for 7 children and a wife who refused to go find a job. I remember when, due to my father's inability to make more income as a janitor, my mother was forced to go out and find a part-time job. My father was called a failure, and my mom chided all of her children to go out and get a college education, as we ourselves would never fail our families, as my father had done in her eyes. She holds a 2-year nursing degree. Last year, my father completed his 4-year bachelor's degree in geology. Now, she simply refers to it as his obsession with rocks. Oddly enough, my mother would often recount how my father's family looked down on him and laughed at him, while at the same time, he was happily married and had quite a few children, while all of them had no children or were divorced. My dad would simply smile and nod his agreement, and for a while, I used to be able to see the lights of defiance and individuality behind his eyes, though, over the years, more and more of that light dimmed, until recently, every time now that I look in my father's eyes, all I see staring back at me is the grim countenance of a clone of my mother. 34 years of marriage, and I can no longer recognize my father. I remember praying when I was 8 years old that if only my parents would get divorced, my father would finally be happy. It's too late now. I have some of the best memories with my father. Starting at 8 years old, I used to go to work with him all night as we would strip their wax off of the floors and lay down a new coat. We would monitor the ancient boilers, and I would help do odds and ends around the maintenance shop. Those are still some of the happiest memories of my childhood, working all night with my father. In a way, I got to see my father more than most of my siblings. Now, my mother loved us too. When we were babies, my mother would sing lullabies to us right before bedtime. This was her special way of showing love to us. It was her duty as a mother. But any other time, and as we grew older, it was my eldest sister, my elder by 6 years, that really raised us and took care of us. When we were older, and no longer favored with lullabies, my mother would show us love by praying for us, teaching us our catechism, and laying out punishments. My mother believed in the saying, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." None of us were spoiled on her watch. In fact, we were so unspoiled that Child Protective Services were called twice on my family, and my parents were placed on 7 years probation with one more violation, and the children would be placed in foster homes. My mother indoctrinated us to believe that it was us versus them. It was our family against the godless heathen world that wanted to split us up and place us into separate foster homes. I ran away 3 times from age 6 to 10. Each time, I came back because I realized, or I had been told, that if I did that, all of my siblings would be split up into separate foster homes because no one wanted to take 7 children all at once into a single foster home. Looking back now, I should have kept running.